Hello, my name is Gayle Levee. I am an elected artist member of the American Artists Professional League, and today I will show you how to handle edges in this 30-minute instructional video. When we're finished, you will better understand how to achieve dynamic edges when painting a landscape, a still life, and a structure. Before I start my demonstrations, I want to show you how I've used edges in 3 of my paintings. This is the one that is on the easel. And I want to show you in particular this mountain. We all know mountains are made out of rock and ice, but nevertheless, I have 3 different kinds of edges here. I've got a softer edge here, a lost edge right here, and a harder edge right here. The variety of edges in rendering this subject makes it a lot more interesting than if I hadn't done this. It would just look cut out and pasted on. Now you can see how I also have variety of edges in the foreground. In these darker areas, the edges are soft or lost. And in this area where there's more of a contrast between the light on the trees and the darkness in these trees behind it, you see how I've given us a harder edge. That's another thing you can do with edges. In a still life, it's important to use edges to show a turning form. This form is turning away from us, even though it has light on it. The value is similar between this green form and the white form. So this is a good place for a lost edge. Also where the plums are in the darkness, in the shadow, I lost the edges in here, but gave us a real sharp edge along this front. It gives us a sense of volume. It gives us a sense of mystery and a sense of form occupying space. Even in a subject like this barn that has to be quite carefully rendered, quite carefully drawn, the perspective drawing has to be absolutely accurate. And once you've done that, it might seem difficult to lose the edges, but you can see how even here, I've got light spilling over this edge, so we have a softer edge right there. You can really see what I did with the edge along this top of the barn roof where it is lost or soft in places. It's really only defined sporadically. And when I get closer to the edge of the canvas, that gets lost entirely. Doing these things with edges helps your eye, helps your viewer's eye move around the canvas. This is a lost edge right there. Although it's a sharp edge here, these 2 buildings are not defined as 2 separate buildings. They're defined as a red shape and a white shape. And that's something that's important to think about when you're designing your painting. That said, I'll go ahead and do a little demonstration about how to achieve these different edges. I'm going to show you 3 demonstrations beginning with the landscape. And I want to tell you a couple of important things. One of them is to use a fairly big brush. This is a number 10 silver. And the other really important thing is to, even if you've started with a drawing, overlap your drawing. You see how I've got this sky color going over the drawing. It's so important to do that. It's basically the best way to get going with dynamic edges. Why do we need dynamic edges? The word dynamic refers to that no 2 edges are the same. It's one of those rules, you hear rules about painting, but one of the rules that you really don't want to break is that you don't want to have repetitive things. You don't want to have little trees lined up in a row or flowers lined up in a row. You don't want to have edges all the same either. And an edge is the transition between one color and the next. You want them to be different. So in order to set myself up to be able to get all different edges, I'm starting out by covering up the drawing. I'll make this transition now to the next color. And here too, I want to have dynamic edges. Let's say in some places I'd like to have these distant mountains look like they're really sharp against the sky. And other places, especially when I get closer to the edge of the painting, like that right there, I want the mountains to blend into the sky a little bit. So this is what you do. You see what I'm doing right here? I'm just painting over it. I'll do that over here too. See how I'm drawing my brush in between with the rag? Rags are also important. It's good to use rags instead of paper towels because they absorb things better. Now see that I just now did? I took the paint that was already on here, I dragged it down next to that mountain peak to make it sharper right there. So now I have areas that are sharper, areas that are less sharp. See how I'm taking this paint color beyond the drawing and beyond the paint that I had already applied. This way, it gives me enough paint on here so that I can do variety in the edges. Another thing you may notice is that I already had my paint colors mixed. That also, it helps me to have plenty of paint already mixed on the palette so that I'm not feeling stingy with it and I'm not inclined to be stingy with it. Now, let's say that I want to get this dark color going on the side of the tree. And I didn't rinse my brush out between colors. I wiped it off on the rag. I want some of this color from the background to already be in the brush. And you see how I'm painting over that background that I put on there. I'm not afraid to get this green into the background, and I'm not afraid to get the background color into the green. This is not like doing a coloring book. I think coloring books were a terrible thing to do to children because it teaches them all the wrong things. Teachers that say stay inside the lines, that's not the way you paint. You do not stay inside the lines when you paint. You definitely want to go beyond the edge of the lines, and that gives you the opportunity to do interesting things with your paint. Let's see, this shadow area is going to be a little bit bluer, reflecting some of the sky shadow on the ground here. And watch how I'm painting it right over the ground and letting it get to be a soft edge there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. You see what's happening with these edges? See how those are soft? That's a soft edge there. You can always harden edges up once you've got them soft and you've decided that you might decide that you want to have a harder edge in some place. But if you've got the edge too hard to start with, it's more difficult, more of a problem to soften it if it's too hard to start with. I got these warm colors in the foreground to make it really come forward. And I want to show you real quick about getting the hard edge. I'm going to put a hard edge on this light area. And for that, I'm using this rosemary flat. I'm just getting some good, loading it up really well with a lot of paint. There's a lot of paint on there. And see how now I have a nice hard edge. In order to do that, I held the brush like this, loaded it very heavily with paint, and then applied the paint on the side that there is paint on the brush. Let's get a nice deep shadow right in here. And that's basically what you need to do in order to paint varied edges, dynamic edges in a landscape. So after getting these large shapes on here, it comes time to define things a little bit better. And one way we can do that is with negative space. I'm going to load my brush heavily with some of the paint that I used for this background. And I'll put a few little sky, they call them sky holes, even if it's not the sky, it's just the other background. Put some of these in here so it begins to look like it's got some, twigs and that sort of thing. I can do it up here. And these tend to be a little bit more defined. These are supposed to be, details, and they can be a little bit more defined. It doesn't all have to be totally lost. This is where you can just kind of have fun with it and just know where to stop. You can get too carried away. So you don't just sit here and go dabby, dabby, dabby. You sort of think about it and define these things a little bit, think about it some more, define it a little bit more. Let's say maybe I'd like to have a real highlight right here. So I just add some more bright yellow right there. And it's one of those things that you take it a little bit at a time. That way it doesn't get overworked. Just kind of be careful about when you're doing this. let's say I want to get a little bit more positive area out here, this sort of rugged looking cedar. These are cedar trees that sort of grow around here, and so I get a chance to look at them a lot. And I'll get over here, use slightly lighter color, get a little bit of it over here. So you can see how even when doing these details, it's important to pay attention to the edges even of the details. And it's important to stop before you get too far along. Now this time I'm going to show you how even if you've gone to all the trouble of doing a perspective drawing, and this is a subject which has sharp edges, naturally in real life, you'd think you touch the edge of a barn and it would feel sharp. You still need to have dynamic edges when you're doing the painting of it. I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to start out with getting the shadow color on here. I like to start with the shadow a lot of the time when I'm doing something like this. Just get this on here, and I'm using a square brush because this is a square-shaped subject and I want to have square-shaped marks. So I'll go ahead with that and just get these shadows started. And in this case, because of that perspective drawing, I am starting out with a fairly careful application of paint because I want to not lose my drawing. This is going to be true of you too when you're doing this. And the temptation is going to be to keep it sharp like this. But you can't. You get it all in here. You see how I'm covering up my drawing, but I'm staying fairly accurate with things. I'm going to be loosening it up and softening things pretty soon. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm getting a little bit of warmth on the underside of this eave. There will be reflected light under here that you wouldn't normally see if you were looking at a photograph. But if you're outside looking at it, you will see it. And that's why we paint outside, so we can actually see what's really there. And now I'll get the shadow color, shadow side. It's not really the shadow side. It's kind of like turning away from the sun, this side of the barn. And you see how I'm using this square brush. I'm getting these square marks. I'm not staying inside the lines. I'm coloring over my lines, but I'm not being as loose and free with it as I was with that landscape. And get some color on the lit side. Nice bright color. And you see how, again, I pre-mixed my paint. Just helps to have plenty of paint to work with. Now I begin to do some interesting brushwork. I pushed this up into that shadow color. This is a cadmium mixture, and it's more opaque than what I mixed up for the shadow. That's one of those things you do kind of watch for when you're painting shadows and light. Because of the way we see, we don't really look into shadows that much. We look more toward the light of things. And so it's kind of nice to have transparent paint in your shadows and more opaque paint in the light. That's one of the reasons I like the cadmiums. They're opaque and they're good for that. Now I'm getting some more different kind of texture going on here, so it looks like it's an old building. And I'm going to have a few variations of my lit color just to make it more interesting and make it look like it's old. Okay, so I've got some different texture going on here now, and I want to show you what we need to do up in this dark area. Remember what I said, that human beings don't really look into the darkness, so we need to soften the darkness a lot. We need to get it kind of blurred. I've got my rag in my hand, and I dry out the brush on the rag, and I just take this dry brush and sort of blur this shadowy area. Get some of these maybe vertical marks going too, because of the vertical boards that this barn is made out of. So you see how I'm blurring this up, and I'll go ahead and zoom in on it so you can see how much I'm doing to make it blurry. See that? I don't want to lose this angle. That angle is important right there. But I'm taking out a lot of the sharp edges in this shadow area, in this entire shadow area. And clean that up right there, get that darkness reestablished right in there. Now, a fun thing that I like to do with these metal roofs, I like to use this brush called a Hake brush, Hake, and I like to get it a little bit moistened, not very much moisture. I'm using Gamsol and Gamblin solvent-free gel. The gel is for a little bit thicker application of paint. The Gamsol is if I'm interested in thinner application of paint. Do you see how if I do this brush, the strokes themselves get across the idea of that metal roof? And I'm adding a little bit of white and a little bit of sky color for this angle because that is reflecting a little bit of the sky. So this angle is going to have a little bit of sky color in it. And you see how I'm using the brush at this angle. And you see also how this brush does not give us hard edges. See how it gives us this raggedy sort of edge along here. That's something that to me speaks of those roofs. Now I'll show you what I want to do about the background. I'm going to continue with my square brush because I still have this square subject and load it with some of this sky color. See, I have plenty of color and I want to load the brush with plenty of it. You see how most of the paint is on that side. So I pay attention to where the paint is. And I get it up here like this. And now I'm going to take strokes that go this direction. I really want to make sure not to just color around it. I want this sky color to be a little bit different from the barn roof, and I feel like it's being awfully similar to it. So I think what I'm going to do is add a little bit of violet and get that in there so it's just a little bit darker. Not quite so similar to the roof. See how I'm taking the paint other directions besides coloring along it. I really don't want to color along any of this stuff. Now add some more white as I work my way down toward the horizon. And then it gets even lighter as it gets closer to the horizon. This is a good place for a sharp edge right there. Now, what just now happened, and this happens as we go along, you see how the brush fits right in there. A single stroke right there gives us a good sharp edge. This would be a good place to bring attention right in through here because it's an interesting shape right there. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. You sort of pay attention while you're painting just to get things going right. Now I'm going to show you something I like to do with my knife when I'm going along something that could have a lot of sharpness to it, but I want to have variation. I can pick up some of the paint that's on here and push it into the subject and then pull it back. So you get plenty of paint on here so you can move that paint around. You see how that ridge happened? This nice little ridge reflecting some light right there. It's one of the reasons we get plenty of paint on here so we can play with it, get it going. We can get variation in the color when we do it that way too. Let's say I'd like to have a sharp edge right here, right there. I can pick up some of that paint and get a real sharp edge there. Now, since I have this ridge here and I have a sharp edge here and a sharp edge here, that means that this edge absolutely has to stay soft. And it already is soft. You can see how there's a little bit of this orange that got out into the sky. And that's what's softening that edge. It's something that is a good thing, something that we want. Now I'll pick up my filbert brush to do the landscape. You see how the filbert brush is probably going to not give me a good sharp edge. I don't even care because my sharp edge is right there and I'd like to have some variety. So right here, I have a softer edge. Over here on the other side, let me zoom out a little bit more. See what I'm doing out there. Over here, I've got this violet and then I have this shadow color. So I'm going to do a soft or maybe even a lost edge right in there where it goes into the shadow color. Zoom in on that one so you can see it. See how it's blending into the shadow right there. On the other hand, with the sky, I'm going to go back to using this square brush and do a square mark right there. And bring some of that mountain color up a little bit so we don't have a tangent. We don't want the mountain to end right at the edge of the roof. And then we soften this, work our way down. So even though we have mountain and sky showing over here, we want to keep it pretty soft because this is pretty close to the edge of the canvas, and keeping things soft at the edge of the canvas is always a good idea. I think I've showed you what you need to see because I showed you the landscape on the other one. The main thing I wanted you to understand is that even when you've got a subject like this, you still want to have soft edges and lost edges in some areas. But I better stop and we'll go on to the next one. Now you remember when I showed you on the still life that I had done that it's important to use soft edges on the turning form. If you've got a form that's turning away, it's important to show that with soft edges. And even though you've done a structured drawing, same as with the barn, you still need to paint over your drawing. I'll start out with getting the shadow side on here, and I'll show you something that you'll have to do that you really won't want to do, and that is you'll need to lose this edge between the shadow side of your object and the cast shadow. Just go ahead and blend it right in together so that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. And also, you see how I'm not following the line of my drawing. I'm having my brushwork do something besides follow that line. It's another important thing to remember. It gives you less of a coloring book look. You see how that went right over that drawing, and that's fine. That's okay. It gives me a more interesting brush stroke than if I was trying to stay inside that line. So this is the dark side of the object. And now I'll start working my way to the midtones. Again, I've got my colors all mixed up in advance. Just makes it easier to pick up plenty of paint. Get these midtones going. Work my way up from dark to light. And you see I'm not rinsing my brush in the Gamsol very much at this point. I'm not rinsing it in the Gamsol at all. I'm just wiping it off with the rag so I don't get too much of a buildup of paint on the brush. I'm working my way up my little line of colors that I've got here. Now I get to this lighter one, and I'm going to put the lighter one on this shoulder of this object because the light shines on that a little different than it does on the other parts. I work my way up toward that lighter color on this side where the light is coming in and get the light on here. Now I'm going to put a highlight over here, and I'll show you what I'll be doing with that highlight when I get the background color on, because that's kind of an important thing to know. But you see how I'm not staying inside this edge any more than I stayed inside that edge. Now for this little shape down here, I want to switch brushes. It'll be a little easier to get that shape defined with the square brush. Now you see how we've got a very soft edge over here, slightly more definition here, and a lost edge right there. So already at this stage, we already have what you'd call dynamic edges. It's just important to kind of bear that in mind as you're doing it. Now, what I'd like to show you is how to get a real sharp edge when you've already painted over your drawing. You can come at it with your brush stroke has a leading edge and a trailing edge. The leading edge is where you start the stroke. The trailing edge is where you end the stroke. And you see how the leading edge automatically has more paint on it than the trailing edge does. Now, if I tried to get at this edge with my left hand, I'd be getting at it with the trailing edge of the brush each time. So I switched to my right hand so that the leading edge of the brush is going to go up against that edge that I want to define. You see how that defined it nice and clear. The reason I wanted a sharp edge there is because we have a good contrast between the shadow here and the light back there. But that's one of the reasons that you can change your edges. There are lots of other reasons that have to do with composition that I don't have time for here, but we may talk about that some other time. Now you see how I'm getting a good sharp edge there. I don't want it to look too much like it's painted around it. If I come back over and work with my brushwork a little bit, I'll show you about a good sharp edge right here. I come at it like this. See how I'm getting that paint into my drawing a little bit? And then I come back over it like this, wipe the brush, and come back over it again. And now I have just the right kind of edge for that area. I'll show it to you again here because this is an important skill to know. Bringing that in like that, wipe the brush off. See, I'm wiping it with my cloth. I don't have it in Gamsol or anything. And then I come back over it like this with the brush. And it gives us just the right kind of edge. Now I want to correct the drawing by bringing this down more so it matches the other one better. I'm going to bring this over here a little bit. You see how when we're painting, because of the fact that we're not staying inside the lines, we'll have some changes that we'll want to do to our drawing. So we put paint on and then we move it around. And that way we get that dynamism going. Now this right here, because there's light here, I'm going to lose this edge. And in some places, that yellow is going to blend in to the green, into the blue and turn green. And that's fine. That's something that our eye is going to, the viewer's eye is going to see that as bright light when I get to that point. Now watch what I'm doing with this area right here, where I'm coming around the vase. My brush strokes are coming around it too. And it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of vase color into the background. If it gets to where there's a lot of the vase color into the background, you can just wipe your brush with this dry rag. Or if you want to do it after every stroke, you can. But this is how you get that important turning going, where you can show that this is a three-dimensional object turning back away from you into the background. You see how that begins to make it look like it's turning into the background. I'll do it over on this side, the other hand. Again, since this side has more contrast, this can be a slightly sharper edge. But if you bring the background color into the edge a little bit, it really makes the form look like it's got volume to it. You can do it just like this. Get some of the blue into the brown and get some of the brown into the blue. And then come back and soften it like that. That really has an effect of giving you space. It looks like a form inhabiting space. And you know, all things that you're painting have form of one kind or another. They're either a plane or a form. Either way, whatever they're doing, they're inhabiting space. And this that we do with these edges, part of what we do is we convey the existence of that space that's around your form. Let me change the angle a little bit here. And so we can see that there's some reflected light happening on that. And now, before we run out of time, I want to get this last little bit of light right here, looking like it's shining out into the world. I'll get a good chunk of highlight right there. See how that just looks like I prepared this for our effective light right there. And then this little highlight can be done with the square brush, the square highlight. And we don't try to keep it inside the drawing. All right, that's the last of my demonstrations. It concludes this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll meet you again in front of the easel. Thank you for joining me. The mission of the American Artist Professional League is to advance the cause of the fine arts in America. We promote high standards, find beauty, support integrity and craftsmanship in all the arts, including painting, sculpture, and the graphic arts. I hope you enjoyed this video from the AAPL. Come back each month for new instructional videos from our exemplary artists. Goodbye.